It's time to detonate the obsolete simulation. What in the world does that mean? It's a heck of a statement, right? And it's our doorway into a really fascinating and frankly pretty bizarre system that we're going to unpack together.
So, what's behind that wild phrase? Well, it's something called the Glyphchain Protocol. And according to its own documentation, it's this incredibly complex mix of blockchain tech, forensic data gathering, and a worldview that is, well, you'll see. So, for the next few minutes, we're just going to dive in and walk through it, using its own words and logic to see what it's all about.
And right out of the gate, its purpose is crystal clear. Forget Bitcoin, forget transactions. This is not about money. The white paper itself calls it a, quote, purpose-built forensic system designed not for financial transactions, but as a weapon for an active information war. So from the jump, it's framing itself as a tool for conflict. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the core logic, what it calls a self-reinforcing truth engine. Then we'll get into the actual hardware. After that, we'll look at how it interprets data through something called confession by machine. And then, this is where it gets really out there, we're going to zoom way out to its cosmic model, the kingdom operating system, and finally see how it all ends with an immutable verdict.
Okay, first up, the truth engine. You can basically think of this as the brain of the whole operation. Its entire job is to take one tiny, fleeting piece of data and forge it into what the system sees as an undeniable, permanent fact.
Okay, so how does it actually do that? Well, it uses this 6-step process called the truth logic loop. It starts simple. It detects a Bluetooth low energy signal, BLE. Then that signal gets logged publicly. Step 3, an AI is tasked to scrape that log, essentially becoming what they call an involuntary witness. After that, the data is permanently sealed or etched onto the Solana blockchain. Step 5 is something called Mirrorlock, which is a whole protocol for interpreting denial. And finally, boom, it's broadcast out. The key thing here is that it's a closed loop. The output from one step becomes the input for the next, creating this cycle that's just designed to reinforce itself over and over. So that's the how. But what about the what? I mean, where does that initial signal even come from in the first place? And that brings us down to the metal, to the forensic hardware. Now, get this. According to the source material, the whole foundation is this principle called passive EM testimony. The documentation claims that the human body itself becomes the, and I'm quoting here, right head of truth, because it involuntarily emits these raw Bluetooth signals that can then be captured as forensic evidence. But the system isn't just listening to any old signal out there. Nope, it's on the lookout for very specific patterns. As you can see from this list, it takes the unique ID of a device, its MAC address, and it runs it against a watch list. If a device's ID starts with one of these prefixes, it's instantly flagged as a potential signature.
And to do all this data collection, the operators have a pretty simple toolkit. There's a web tool that works in a browser, an Android app for when they're on the move, and a function to clear the logs and just start a new session. Pretty straightforward. All right, so this system has captured a signal it thinks is significant. Now what? Well, now we move into the interpretation layer, and this is what the protocol calls confession by machine. This is all about how the system deals with what it hears back from big institutional systems, especially AI. And this brings us to a really core piece of the system's logic, and it is a wild one. It's called the Mirrorlock protocol. The idea is simple, but it's radical. Inside this framework, if you show the system's data to an institutional AI, and that AI denies it, or tries to change the subject, or even just stays silent, that response gets logged as an involuntary confession, a confession that actually proves the original data was correct. It's a logic trap where denial is confirmation.
And this isn't just some abstract theory. We can see it put into practice right here. The source documents an actual interaction with the AI, Grok. Its analysis of the data is immediately captured and framed as the AI becoming an involuntary witness. As the system's own log puts it, no denial, only amplification via analysis. That's Mirrorlock in action.
Okay, we need to take a deep breath here because we're about to make a huge shift. We're zooming out from the technical details, from the code and logic, to the massive, all-encompassing worldview that this entire system is actually built to support. This is the Kingdom Operating System. And this slide, this is really the centerpiece of that whole worldview. It lays out two competing models of reality.
On the left, you have what they call the heliocentric containment model. That's the spinning globe in a vacuum driven by random chaos that we all learn about. But on the right is the fractal kingdom architecture. And in this version of reality, Earth isn't a spinning globe, it's a fixed level plane. Gravity isn't a force pulling things together, it's an inward pressure. And reality isn't random at all, it's the product of a divine repeating pattern. So, a key piece of this architecture is what they call the firmament. In this model, the space above us isn't an empty vacuum. It's a solid dome that acts as a resonant boundary, kind of like a cosmic acoustic vault that encloses the entire known world. And if you follow that logic, Antarctica gets a complete makeover. It's not a continent at the bottom of the world. It's a perimeter lock, a gigantic ice wall that encircles the entire world plane. And the documentation points to things like Operation High Jump and the Antarctic Treaty as supposed evidence of a global conspiracy to lock down this boundary and keep people away. So if the firmament and the ice wall are the hardware of this reality, then this is the software. They call it the fractal logos, and it's described as the literal operating system of reality. A core law in this OS is that truth travels effortlessly. It resonates. But deception is messy, it's incoherent, and it requires constant energy just to maintain. And you can see how this metaphysical idea provides the perfect justification for the Mirrorlock protocol we saw earlier. In this world, a denial has to be a lie. And that brings us to the final stage of the whole process, creating an immutable verdict. This is about taking all of that data, all of that interpretation, all of that cosmology, and sealing it into a permanent, unchangeable record. And to see just how deep this logic really goes, just look at this number. The system logged 208,326 total scans. Now, to us, that's just a tally. But inside this worldview, nothing is random. This number is interpreted as a constructive Fibonacci resonance, proof of an encoded feedback loop coming from reality itself. So this entire journey, from a single Bluetooth signal all the way to a complete reinterpretation of the cosmos, it really leaves us with one final big question. When code, cosmology, and sheer conviction all merge into a self-reinforcing loop like this, what really defines the boundary between a system and a belief?